There is a particular kind of tired that comes from saying yes when your whole body wanted to say no. A tired that smiles. A tired that pours the tea, holds the door, listens one more time even when there's nothing left to give. Maybe you know this tired. Maybe you've called it kindness for years. People call you the nice one, the easy one, the one who never makes things difficult. And maybe somewhere in you that title feels like an achievement, something you worked hard to earn. But sit with it for a second. Underneath the compliment, there's often a quiet cost nobody talks about. Not weakness. It's wiring, because being too nice is rarely a personality trait you simply woke up with one day. More often, it's a pattern your nervous system learned a long time ago, in rooms you don't remember anymore, with people whose moods you had to read before you could even read words. Psychologists call this a fawn response. It sits alongside the more familiar fight, flight, and freeze, but it works differently. Instead of running from danger or facing it head-on, you learn to disarm it. You learn to please it. You learn that if you can just be agreeable enough, soft enough, helpful enough, the danger might pass you by without ever touching you. It often begins in childhood. It rarely ends there. Think about the earliest version of you. The one who noticed when a parent's voice changed, when silence in the house meant something was wrong, when being good seemed to be the only way to keep the peace. You weren't born agreeable. You became it, slowly, carefully. Like learning a second language you didn't choose to speak, but had to in order to survive. This is where attachment theory enters the picture, and it explains more than most people realize. Attachment theory simply describes the patterns we form with the people who raised us, patterns that quietly shape how we connect with everyone afterward. If love in your early life felt conditional, if affection seemed to come and go depending on your behavior, your mood, your obedience, your nervous system absorbed a lesson it never forgot. Closeness must be earned. Not given, earned, so you became excellent at earning it. Excellent at shrinking, smoothing, softening, anything that kept the people you needed close. And here is the quiet ache hidden inside all of that. What looks like generosity on the outside can sometimes be fear wearing a gentle face. Not selflessness, it's self-protection. That doesn't mean your kindness was fake. It doesn't mean the part of you that gives, that listens, that shows up for people isn't real. It is real. But real kindness and learned appeasement can look identical from the outside while feeling completely different on the inside. One comes from abundance. The other comes from anxiety. One says, I want to give this to you. The other whispers, I'm afraid of what happens if I don't. When was the last time you said no and actually meant it without rehearsing an apology in your head the entire time? Sit with that question for a moment longer than feels comfortable. For a lot of people, the answer is uncomfortably distant. Maybe you can't even remember. Maybe every no you've ever given came wrapped in 3 sorries and a promise to make it up to someone somehow later. That's not politeness. That's a nervous system bracing for disapproval the way some people brace for physical pain. There's a particular kind of psychological tension that builds in people who consistently override themselves to please others, and it has a name: cognitive dissonance. It simply describes the discomfort of holding 2 conflicting truths at once. On one hand, you genuinely don't want to do the thing. On the other, you say yes anyway, smile through it, and tell yourself it's fine. Your mind, unable to sit with that contradiction for long, starts rewriting the story. It convinces you that you wanted to help all along, that you're simply generous by nature, that the exhaustion you feel afterward is unrelated. But the body remembers what the mind edits out. The tightness in your shoulders after another favor you didn't want to do, the hollow feeling after a conversation where you agreed with everything and meant none of it. Not forgetting. It's the body keeping score. There's also something quietly seductive about being liked, something almost chemical. Every time someone smiles at you because you said yes, every time you're praised for being so accommodating, so low maintenance, so easy to be around, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the chemical of pleasure, but it's really the chemical of anticipation and reward, the spark that says do that again. So your brain learns, approval feels good, disapproval feels dangerous. And slowly, without ever deciding to, you start chasing the feeling of being needed the way some people chase any other quiet addiction. Not love. It's leverage your own brain holds over you. This is the part that rarely gets said out loud. People-pleasing often isn't about the other person at all. It's about regulating your own anxiety through their reaction. If they're happy with you, you can relax. If they're upset, even slightly, even over something small, your whole internal weather shifts. That's not generosity. That's outsourcing your sense of safety to someone else's facial expression. Psychologists describe something called locus of control, which simply means where you believe the power over your life actually sits. Some people carry an internal locus of control. Their sense of okayness comes from within, shaped by their own choices, values, and self-respect. Others carry an external locus of control, where their peace depends entirely on what other people think, say, or feel about them. If you've spent years being too nice, there's a good chance your locus of control has quietly drifted outward, handed over piece by piece, compliment by compliment, approval by approval, until your own opinion of yourself became the last voice in the room instead of the first. And here's the strange, almost paradoxical truth buried inside all of this. The more you give yourself away to be loved, the harder it becomes to feel truly seen, because the people around you aren't responding to you. They're responding to the version of you that never says no, never disagrees, never takes up too much space. They love the performance. They've simply never met the person underneath it. Not intimacy. It's a beautifully decorated distance. There's grief in that even if you've never named it. The grief of being well-liked and still feeling unknown. The grief of being everyone's safe place while having none of your own. You can be surrounded by people who adore you and still feel an aching kind of loneliness, because the love they're offering is for the mask, and some quiet part of you knows it. Who would you be, do you think, if you didn't have to earn your place at every table you sat at? It's worth sitting with that, even uncomfortably, even if no answer arrives right away. Maybe you'd take up more space. Maybe you'd say the unpopular opinion in the group chat instead of typing it out and deleting it. Maybe you'd let a silence sit instead of rushing to fill it with reassurance nobody asked for. Maybe you'd disappoint someone on purpose, simply because their comfort isn't actually your responsibility. That thought alone might feel terrifying. Notice that. Terror, in response to the idea of mild disappointment, is information. It tells you how high the cost of disagreement once was, somewhere back in your story, even if you can't remember exactly when the lesson was taught. It's important to say clearly that none of this is about becoming cold, or cruel, or suddenly difficult just to prove a point. The goal was never to swing from one extreme into another. The goal is to find your way back to something more honest. Real warmth doesn't require self-erasure. Real generosity doesn't require resentment simmering quietly underneath it. There's a profound difference between kindness that flows from fullness and niceness that flows from fear, and learning to tell them apart might be one of the most important things you ever do for yourself. Kindness from fullness sounds like this: I want to help you and I still feel like myself afterward. Niceness from fear sounds like this: I said yes and now I feel like I disappeared a little. Not the same. Never the same. One leaves you whole. The other leaves you smaller, piece by piece, favor by favor, smile by smile, until one day you look in the mirror and don't quite recognize the exhausted stranger looking back. There's also a quieter, more painful layer to being too nice, one that often goes unspoken because it sounds almost ungrateful to admit. Sometimes you resent the very people you've spent years accommodating. Not because they asked too much of you necessarily, but because you never told them what you actually needed, and some small, wounded part of you expected them to guess. That resentment isn't a character flaw. It's the natural result of years spent translating your needs into silence, and then feeling hurt when nobody could read a language you never spoke aloud. Not their failure. It's an old, unfinished conversation you never started. This is why boundaries get such a complicated reputation, especially for people who learned early that being agreeable was the price of being kept around. Boundaries get mistaken for walls, for coldness, for the opposite of love. But a boundary isn't a wall built to keep people out. It's a door with a hinge, one you get to open or close depending on what's true for you in that moment. Not rejection. It's information about what you can hold without breaking. Saying no to someone else is, more often than people realize, a way of saying yes to yourself. And saying yes to yourself, especially after years of doing the opposite, can feel disorienting at first. It might even feel selfish, even when it isn't. That discomfort doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It usually means you're doing something unfamiliar, and your nervous system, used to one particular rhythm, is simply catching up to a new one. Healing this pattern rarely happens in one dramatic moment. There's no single day where you wake up suddenly free of decades of conditioning. It happens in small, unglamorous instances. The pause before automatically agreeing to something, the breath you take before answering a text you don't want to answer. The slightly shaky no that comes out smaller than you wanted but comes out anyway. Each of these moments is a tiny renegotiation with yourself, a quiet message sent inward that says, your comfort matters here too, not perfection, just practice. And slowly, almost without noticing, something begins to shift. The praise you used to chase for being so easy, so accommodating, so low maintenance, starts to feel less like nourishment and more like a costume that never quite fit. You start to notice the difference between people who like you for your softness, and people who actually know you, contradictions and edges and all. You start to wonder, with a kind of tender curiosity rather than shame, how much of your personality was actually you, and how much of it was a strategy you built so young you forgot it was ever optional. There's also something worth saying about the people who genuinely deserve your kindness, the ones who never asked you to disappear in order to be loved. Healing from chronic people-pleasing doesn't mean withdrawing your warmth from the world. It means redirecting it toward people who can actually receive it without draining you, and toward yourself, who has probably been waiting the longest. Not withdrawal. It's a homecoming, finally, to the parts of you that got quietly abandoned somewhere along the way in service of being acceptable to everyone else. You might start to notice, too, how much energy was spent managing other people's emotions instead of simply feeling your own. The constant scanning of a room, the reading of tone before words are even fully spoken, the bracing for disapproval that often never even arrives. That kind of hypervigilance is exhausting in a way that doesn't always show on the outside, which is part of why it goes unnoticed for so long, even by the person living inside it. You can look completely fine, completely composed, completely nice, while quietly running on empty underneath the surface. Not laziness when you finally crash. It's a body finally asking for the rest it was denied for years. Perhaps the most freeing realization, the one that tends to arrive slowly and almost unannounced, is this: you were never actually responsible for managing everyone else's comfort. You can care about people deeply, want good things for them, show up for them in real and meaningful ways, and still not be obligated to erase yourself in the process. Those two things were never mutually exclusive, no matter how convincingly the old pattern argued otherwise. Care without self-abandonment. Warmth without disappearance. That's not a contradiction. It's simply what kindness was always supposed to feel like before fear got mixed into it. There will probably still be moments, even after all this understanding, where the old reflex kicks in. Where you say yes before you've even checked in with yourself. That doesn't mean nothing has changed. It means you're human, and old patterns leave deep grooves that take time to soften. The difference, the real difference, is that afterward you'll notice. You'll feel the small ache of having overridden yourself again, and instead of dismissing it, you'll sit with it. You'll ask yourself gently what you actually wanted to say instead. That noticing, however small it seems, is the beginning of everything changing. Maybe the truest form of self-respect isn't loud at all. Maybe it doesn't look like dramatic transformation or sudden boldness. Maybe it's quieter than that. Maybe it sounds like telling the truth in a small moment when a lie would have been easier. Maybe it looks like letting a silence exist instead of rushing to smooth it over. Maybe it feels like disappointing someone slightly and discovering, to your own surprise, that the world doesn't end, that they don't leave, that you're still safe. There is a kind of peace that comes only after you stop performing yourself for an audience, even if that audience was made of people who loved you. It's not a loud peace. It doesn't announce itself with confidence or certainty. It's closer to the hum of a quiet room after everyone has finally gone home. The particular stillness that exists when there's no one left to please, no expression to read, no version of you required except the one that's actually there. In that hum, something in you can finally exhale. And maybe that's the quiet truth underneath all of this. You were never too nice. You were simply too unprotected for too long, and kindness became the only language you trusted to keep you safe. But you get to choose slowly, gently, again and again, to let your kindness come from a fuller place now. A place that doesn't require your own disappearance as the price of being loved.